Hello and welcome everyone to the series of Demos for Democracy, live interactive online demos featuring designers and builders of the latest innovative governance platforms, tools or methods to foster greater openness and collaboration. And right now we have as a special guest the Open Science Framework. They are going to talk about increasing openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scientific research. With us is Courtney Soderberg, who is a statistical and methodological consultant at the Center for the Open Society. So thank you for accepting our invitation, Courtney.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you. And please share with us what the Open Science Framework is, why did you build this platform, and more or less the goals it has.
Sure. So the idea behind the Open Science platform and behind the Center for Open Science more broadly, which is the nonprofit that runs the Open Science Framework, is the idea that we want to increase the openness, transparency, and reproducibility of scientific research. So there's a big gap right now kind of between the ideals of science and how science is actually practiced. So in general, as scientists, we want to study innovative ideas, but we also want to have reproducible research. And in theory, science is supposed to be collaborative. We're supposed to accumulate knowledge. So, share what we're finding, be very open about what we're doing. But in actuality, what generally happens is that the entire scientific process is completely hidden up until you get to the point of publication, at which point those results are actually hidden behind paywalls from publishers. So only certain people actually have access to the findings. And if something isn't published, nobody really has access to the findings. And rarely do people have access to data or materials that are created. Mm-hmm. And so this has actually created a huge problem in that a lot of areas of science have this kind of reproducibility crisis going on. So in areas like psychology, neuroscience, pharmacology, there's really low rates of replicability. So if I do a study, somebody else is going to have a really hard time replicating that finding. And so at the Center and the Open Science Framework, part of what we want to do is make the process of doing open science really easy for researchers to do. So giving them tools that allow them to easily track their project through the whole cycle from inception to study, to publication and post-publication discussions, but also to share that process and those materials and that data publicly should they want to. And so what the Open Science Framework is, it's a completely free web application where researchers can host all their data and their materials, and then it does automatic logging and versioning to pick up that whole life cycle. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so I can kind of show you what this actually looks like. Let me find the screen share button.
It's underneath.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. So if you want to follow along, you can go to osf.io. That's the website. So what you're looking at right now is a project that somebody actually created on the site. Just you can see how this actually works. Mm-hmm. And then I'll show you a little bit about how to create it once I've got you oriented. So this is a project that has 3 collaborators. It has a description of the project. And then what you'll notice is that it's a couple of studies in one paper. All of the materials for each study are available here to anybody. So they're available to scientists, they're available to citizen scientists. Anybody can come and download these materials and reuse them if they want. So you'll see the data's here, the materials here for all of the studies. You also can track how many people have downloaded your files so that we give researchers alt metrics other than citation rates to kind of keep track of how much impact their scientific work is having. So if you notice, this article's in press, although it's actually now been published at Psychological Science. You can download it here, and it's been downloaded 223 times. And then we also give you information sort of about who in the world is viewing your project in the last day. This one's been viewed 3 times in the US. And then if you notice what's going on the bottom is that there's a log of everything that happened on this project. So as the project was built, as more material was added, as changes were made, all of that gets logged to kind of open up that scientific process. So what this actually means is all these files are under version control. So to give you an example of what that looks like on another project, this is a project where somebody created a tool that researchers can use to calculate effect sizes. It's just to give you a kind of idea between citation rates and impact. This article that these tools are associated with has only been cited 41 times, but it's actually been downloaded 12,000 times. So, this is actually giving researchers a much better idea of the breadth and the scope of the impact of their work. But if you go and look at one of these files, you'll see that there are 6 different versions of this. So as the materials get updated, everything's under version control. So the researcher can keep better track of what's going on, and then anybody who's watching the project knows, okay, there's a new version of the data. If I downloaded the old data, that's the data I have. Maybe I should download the new data just to kind of keep abreast of what's going on with the project. So just to show you how you could build one of these on your own, I'm going to open up a new window and start building this. So this is kind of like the login screen. When you create a project, you just give it a title. And then every project starts out completely blank. And the reason we do this is because every project is going to be different. People use this website in very different ways. And so we want to give researchers the flexibility to create the type of project that they want. So I can add some structure by saying, materials.
Do I have to create an user?
Yeah. So to actually make a project, you do have to get an account, but it's completely free. So anybody can become a user. It's not, only people at universities or only academics. Anybody can get an account.
And by creating a user, you can write your profile and also. Okay.
Yeah. So the profile, once you have an account, you can fill in stuff about your employment, your education, your ORCID ID if you have that, or like Twitter and things to connect everything together.
Can members communicate among each other?
Yeah. So if I go into a project, here is, here, I'll open up this one. Here's a, project that was done as a demo. In another place, I'm a contributor, so is one of my colleagues. So I can actually click on this little blue tab and it opens up a commenting window. And I can make a comment on this saying, I think we should add materials.
Okay.
She'll then get that, and then all the comments, we'll be able to see them, but they'll also be saved with the project. So we have kind of a log of what happened in terms of our thinking and how we were talking about the project. Once a project is made public, you can also allow other people to comment on the project so that the broader research community can have a really engaging conversation with you about the research you've put up on the OSF if they would like to kind of allow a continued post-publication discussion or just a discussion about research that it hasn't been published yet, but people maybe are really interested in.
While I was looking at your platform, I saw that there are projects that have like 100 contributors.
Yeah.
And how does that work? And
sure.
Yes.
So here, I'll open one up. So one of the really big projects on this site is something called the reproducibility project in psychology, which has, I think it's something like 200 contributors. So how that works is that there's one, here it is, there's one giant project that has, there are a lot of files, so it takes a little bit of time to load. Here we go. So there's one kind of parent project that all of these contributors have access to. But then each of the contributors is working on their own replication study. And so underneath this broad parent project, the reproducibility project, psychology, you'll see that there are other folders that have different names to organize the different replications. So here's the replication, here's one replication, here's another one. And so they all live in the same folder because they're all related to the same broad project. But you can give contributors differential access to different parts of the project. So for example, if you go into sharing, right, there's a huge number of contributors. So these different people have different levels of access. So, you know, Andrew Arts just has read and write access, and we could make it so he would only have access to the specific subcomponent of the project that he was working on. So he might still be able to see the whole project, but maybe he can only upload and delete files from one particular part. And so it really makes collaboration easy because everybody has to go to the same place to get all the files, but you do still have fine-grained control over, okay, who has access to what, who can see what.
Okay. And the Wiki tab, is that for having a space that anyone can edit, or the people that you select?
Yeah, so the Wiki space, different people use it different ways, but for big projects, it can kind of be an explanation of what the project's about, what the structure is. Some people think about it kind of as a README for the project. So this wiki is, because this is such a big project, it's kind of an explanation of why this project exists, what it's doing, and there are a bunch of different wikis. And then it has links out to you know, other pages. The wiki is collaborative, so anybody who is a contributor on the project can edit it, and it is version controlled. So if different people are changing things, you can see the changes that they're making. This is just showing the version history. The whole the version control is overwritten, or is written on top of Git. So it doesn't require knowing how to use Git or GitHub to use the version control. It does it automatically, but it's a nice feature for tracking how a project changes across its lifespan.
Okay, great. And how many members do you, when did you start this project, the platform?
Sure. So the platform was actually originally conceived as part of one of the co-founders' dissertations. So Jeff Spies is one of the co-founders. The Open Science Framework was part of his dissertation. The Center for Open Science itself was founded in early 2013, at which point the OSF was released in beta version. So that's kind of when it became something that, you know, the whole scientific community could use.
Okay, and since then, how many members have joined? And...
Right. I meant to look up the latest statistics of this before I started this, but last time I checked, I think it was something around 6,000 active users, okay. People with accounts. Yeah.
And do you know where they're from? Are they mainly?
Yeah. So we have my guess would be that it's mainly North America and Europe currently. And a lot of them are social sciences, though we do have, you know, definitely people using it from biology, from bioinformatics. We have actually a couple of classes running OSF projects for part of their classwork. So we're definitely expanding our user base, but right now it's mostly North America and Eastern Europe, though you can, on some projects, you can see, so for example, this one. If we go into the statistics and look at the viewing, how many people have viewed it in the last week, you'll see that there's actually some activity in China.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have you encountered people who disagree with the idea behind the platform? And also, what other challenges are you facing?
Sure. So I would say the whole idea about open sharing of scientific materials, it's not the norm yet. There are a lot of groups, including us, who are working to making open sharing something that is really normative. But you know, with scientific research, your data, your materials, those are things that you've created, and a lot of people do feel very attached to those. And so right now, because in terms of tenure and getting jobs, publications is really the thing that matters the most. Trying to break out of the idea that only publications count can be a little difficult. And so when you're sharing your materials, some people are worried that it's going to actually hurt their publication rate. In terms of other hurdles, people who are working with human subjects data, especially, just sharing data can be problematic because of sensitive information and data. And so if people are working with human subjects data, they do have to be a little bit more aware of, okay, what are the regulations that concerns my data? Is my data sensitive? Could I maybe share a subset of the data, de-anonymizing it before I share it? So in general, unless it's something like healthcare data, which really the whole data set is just under HIPAA control, and that becomes really complicated. A lot of times there are ways to share either a subset of the data or maybe just the materials, like the surveys or the analysis scripts that were used on the data to open up the scientific process a little bit more. But that does become problematic when you're working with certain types of human subjects data.
A friend of mine was concerned that she's a sociologist. And I explained her the platform, and she was very worried about also how people can use your data. Not only that affects your rate of publication, but also that what if they use it to advocate against what you are advocating precisely. And
right.
She works in immigration issues, and so she will be scared that her study is used to or incentivizes the.
Yeah, so in terms of how the data is shared, once something is made public on the OSF, so if a researcher wants to use the OSF completely in private mode, so only they and their contributors could see the project contents, they can do that. And then when they feel comfortable, they can either make the entire project or some parts of the project public. So somebody could make their materials public, but not their data. Okay. But once something is made public, then other people can download it and use it kind of however they see fit. But what I will say is that more and more funders and journals are starting to require or at least suggest that data be made public. So I think the broader scientific community may have to start having a conversation about, if you use somebody's data, what are kind of the normative practices that you should follow once using that data. We're just making the sharing of that data easier so that there's not kind of a barrier to scientists easily sharing their data in a safe place that's, going to be there.
Yeah. And okay, of course, anyone that wants to ask a question, you can do that directly or through the chat. Here Arno is asking, so if you had 3 wishes, if you could ask anything for the platform, what would them be, and how do you define success?
Sure. So if I had 3 wishes for the platform, one of them would be, I should mention one thing the platform does, because then my answers will be make a little bit more sense. So on the platform, we connect with a couple of other tools that are already out there, just so that if scientists have a tool that they really like that supports part of their workflow, they can keep using it but connect it. So we have a couple of add-ons, which are currently Dataverse, Dropbox, BigShare, GitHub, and Amazon S3. So one add-on one tool that I know I use a lot in terms of collaborative paper writing is Google Docs, just because it's really easy to get everybody simultaneously writing a paper. I would love if the platform had that. We actually are currently working on integration of that. Another thing I would like is just, I think that right now the platform, we've tried to make it as flexible as possible for researchers, just because different projects are going to have a different organization. But because it is so open, I think that when people go and start their first project, there are actually too many choices for them, and it can be a little intimidating to get started. So something I wish, which is actually something I'll probably be working on the next few months, is to just give people some suggested templates saying, if you're running an experimental study, here are some example folder structures that might work really well for you, to just kind of help researchers get started a little bit on that process. And then I think the last thing I would wish is maybe just if we have gobs of time, make it a little bit prettier, which is very aesthetic, but anything that's really easy to look at actually makes the whole process of working with a tool easier from a psychological standpoint. But because we want it to be as functional as possible, that's definitely on the back burner of things we want to do. But eventually, it will get done.
Okay. And how do you define success for the platform?
Sure. So in terms of success for the platform, you can define it in a couple ways. We kind of think of it as, some of it is, the number of active users, but part of it is how they're using it. So better tracking of the scientific process is fantastic, but even more fantastic would be, more openly shared projects, more openly shared data. And so I think over time, how we define success will actually start to change. Because as open sharing becomes maybe more normative, then we may put a little bit more emphasis on that in terms of, are we doing our job? Are we getting people to openly share their materials? Are we allowing them to do that really easily?
Yeah, I was reading one of the papers published about the whole idea behind opening and sharing this science data in general. And what caught my attention was the mentioning of that every year there are 1.3 million science publications. Mm-hmm. And how are we, or does the platform also intend to build a bridge? Not only get us to collaborate, but also to build a bridge between research and decision makers, or people that have that have the power to take all these new discoveries into consideration to improve.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we do. But one way we actually do that is to focus on making the research that is out there more reproducible, which the more reproducible research is, we tend to, as a scientific community, give it more validity because we can find the same effect over and over. And so part of what goes into that is keeping really good track of what happened in a project, because if the hypothesis behind a project or the statistical analyses of a project have shifted a ton over time, that can give you an indication that maybe the project is far more exploratory in nature than confirmatory, which is something that people who are using that research to make decisions need to take into account. It's not that one is inherently better than the other, both are really important, but that's important information for consumers of that research to know. And it's something that right now is not easily determined from the final published product, because you just see that end snapshot. You don't get the whole thing. So part of how we're trying to, bridge that gap is making the information that comes out a little bit, hopefully, more valid, but also just, opening up the resources so that people who maybe don't, maybe you don't have access to the final published version in psychological science because it's behind a paywall. But if the people posted their data and their analyses and maybe an Impress write-up on the OSF, you can still get to that information.
I was reading the other day about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that they said that every research they are funding must be open. Mm-hmm. Have you approached them to offer the platform as a place where all that can happen?
So I believe we have, but I'm not sure. That was just announced, so I'm not sure how far along in the process we've gotten. But we definitely, groups that are supporting or requiring openness on the part of researchers, we do definitely try and reach out to them to say, how can we help support your efforts? Because it is great when we find people who have the same ideals as we do.
And is your tool the first one in the space?
So there are definitely other tools in the space that allow for, uploading of materials and version control and things like that. The OSF is one of the few ones that is completely free to researchers. So there are some other tools out there like Figshare, for example, which is one of the tools we actually connect with. However, Figshare, it's oftentimes free to researchers, but the university that the researchers at may have to pay for a Figshare license, or if you're a citizen scientist and are affiliated with the university, depending on how much use you want to get out of it, you may have to pay. So the OSF is one of the few that's completely free and kind of supports the entire workflow rather than one particular piece of it.
Oh, okay. And from the tech point of view, is the platform open source? Do you need help? Do you have it on GitHub so that people can?
Yeah, so it's completely open source. It is currently it is on GitHub currently and before. It was on GitHub. We've just started to try and figure out how to engage, or the ways in which it would be most useful both to us and the broader communities, the broader software development coder community, to kind of have them collaborate with us on the project. But I think it is something that we definitely are going to look more into in the future as we kind of figure out what's the best way to engage the broader community and helping us build the tool. But in terms of right now, we definitely we love getting user feedback from people. So if somebody tries the tool and they say, hey, it would be nice if it had this feature, we definitely pay attention to that. That's actually how Google Docs became one of the things that we try and integrate with. We got a lot of researchers saying, it would be really nice if you had a collaborative writing tool to connect with. And we said, you know what? Okay, we will try and add that in. So it looks like Maria wanted to look at profile information. So I can show you what my profile looks like. So basically it shows your name, when it was created, all your public projects. So private projects are not on the profile, but any public projects you have are listed. And then in terms of information about you, I can provide all this specific information if I wanted. So I could put a personal website, an ORCID ID, researcher ID, Twitter, GitHub. I haven't put any of those. I have some, I just haven't put them yet. And then you can list your employment and your education. And part of this is just in case there's another, Courtney Soderberg on the OSF, people can tell us apart. Probably not another Courtney Soderberg, but like Tim Smith or something like that. There might be multiple people with the same name. And so the profile information allows you to figure out, okay, which Tim Smith am I looking at?
Okay, perfect. And so would you like to add something else or explain your favorite feature? Is there something?
Sure. So one of my favorite features is something called registration. So we do version control everything, but if you think about kind of how research is done, there are certain points in the research lifecycle which may be really important and you may want to really keep track of. So for example, right before you start data collection, it might be really important to you to be able to go back to what that project looked like at that point. Or say keep track of which version of a manuscript you submitted for publication the first time. And so what registration does is it creates frozen timestamped read-only versions of a project. So if I go into a demo project, where is, here we go. So this is just the shell project that I created. I can go to registration and then make a new registration of this and give it some sort of description because I may make multiple registrations of a project. So I'll say free data collection. I say register. And then I don't know if it's showing up on the screen, but there's kind of diagonally, it's saying read only. And so this will never change. I can go back and make changes to the original product. So, the materials could change or the analysis scripts could change in the actual project, but this will never change. And so I can actually, so this citation, it's a permanent unique identifier. So this will always point back to this registration. I could send it to somebody if, let's say, I wanted a reviewer to be able to see what my project looked like when I started data collection. I could do that. And I should mention, everything on the site has these permanent unique identifiers, not just the registrations. So like the actual site has one, the analysis has one as well. So if you were wanting to, host something on the OSF and then put a link in the actual paper to point towards your data, those would always point back to the correct place.
Are you planning on using also all the data that's input to build something maybe like a predictive collaboration feature? Like, hey, maybe you are in biology and maybe you are in psychology, but you are talking about the same, you should talk?
Yeah, so that's something that we'd like to do as we figure out the best metadata structure. So what you can do is add tags to a project that kind of describe what it's about to make it more searchable. So I could add a tag on here that, let's say this is a meta-analysis and it's about prejudice. So if I was doing this work, I could search for prejudice and see all the other projects that have used that tag. It'll also give me some suggestions for related tags. So that, let's say, I was using prejudice, but some sociologists or maybe some anthropologists who were using the site were also researching prejudice and they had tagged their work. I could search across the entire platform, regardless of what scientific discipline somebody's working in, and saying, what's out there on this topic. You can also search for people, as Maria asked. So I can search for, let's say, Carly Beth Hawkins. I can search for her and she'll come up, as well as components and projects that are related to her. So Arnaud is asking about branching. So you can fork projects if they're public or if they're yours and you have access to them. So if you'll notice for this project, it's public, so I could duplicate it and there's a count of how many forks there have been. So I can fork this project and then all the public content as well as the structure will get forked over into a new project. I can make changes to this. It won't affect the original. And it'll always point back to where it was forked from. So I can get back to the parent project.
Arno is also asking, but can you do all these via API as opposed to the
user interface?
Yeah.
So right now, as far as I know, though, this is all built on like Python and Git. So maybe if you dug through the code that's on GitHub, you could maybe figure out a way to, do all this through the API. But right now, currently, it is mainly through the user interface, just because we wanted to make sure that there wasn't a technological barrier to people using the tool. Just because most of the people using it right now are scientists who have there are some scientists who are great coders. There are a lot of scientists who maybe have a little bit of coding background, but not too much. And then there are some that don't have any coding. And so we wanted to make it usable for kind of the broadest range of people to start out with.
Okay. Yes, and Maria is asking about, can you search for people working in X subject?
Right. So if so it depends on, what information they put in. So you can see I typed in psychology. It'll bring up users who have psychology in their profile. So like Frederick mentioned that he has a minor in quantitative psychology, so he comes up. It'll bring up components with tags about psychology or psychology in the title, same with projects and titles. So it depends a little bit on how much information people put in their profile and how much they use the tags, or that information is in the actual title of the project.
Okay. And do you have like a set of guidelines that or best practices so that projects are easily reproduced and uploaded to the platform?
Yeah, so we are currently working on a best practices guide for replicability of science in general, and for best practices of kind of suggested ways of using the OSF to get the most out of it. Right now, that is not in a accessible published form anywhere. I head up the kind of teaching training section of the COS, and I just started 5 months ago. So a lot of the best practices guides and templates and instructional material is on the to-do list for the next couple months, but hasn't quite been completed yet.
Okay. Arno is asking, a broader question is whether people can use the tool to find potential collaborators or help on a given project, more that kind?
Yeah, so in terms of broader communities, the Center for Open Science, so the nonprofit above the OSF, we do try and create community efforts around this. We're actually updating our website soon to make those communities more evident, the communities we have currently going. In terms of, broader community outreach, we also have free statistical and methodological training, which is what I head up, which is, you can think of kind of as it's not Stack Overflow because right now there's only one person responding to your questions, but it can be used as a place to go get help and questions. The email is stats-consulting@cos.o, by the way, if you'd like to know. So one way to kind of build a discourse or maybe potential collaborators, if a project is public and allows commenting, would be to comment on the project and start a discourse with, I'm trying to find the project. Oh, I realized that I overwrote that one tab. Would be, you could start commenting on somebody's project and maybe start a discourse with them, is one way you could do it right now. But there's no kind of official, want to create a new community, here's how right now.
Do you want to make a question? I think I'm going to question.
Okay, right. Are you talking about the IPython and Jupyter people? So in terms of all the people we're talking to, so I know some of who we're talking to. I know that in terms of, I'm a big fan of IPython Notebook, though I'm not a big Python person, so I don't use it all that much, but I know for people who do use Python, it's a fantastic tool. My guess is that we either have talked to them a little bit or at some point in the future we'll talk to them, but I'm not exactly sure about whether it's happened yet or not, unfortunately. Sorry.
Sure. So Courtney, I was wondering if there's been any interest either to date or for in the future to extend this into science data and tools that come from the private sector instead of the academic sector.
Mm-hmm. So could you give me an example of a private sector tool that you might be, or?
So, we look at a couple different types of open data here at the GovLab, and one of them is this idea of corporate data philanthropy. So the idea of a corporation taking data that they collect or open tools that they use, and when it doesn't directly affect a competitive advantage of it, they make it public so that other people can use it or other corporations can use it. Obviously a much more kind of nascent field than the open science community or the open kind of government data community. But it seems to be picking up a little bit of speed, and I'm just wondering if there's any science-focused corporations that you've kind of looked into bringing into the open science framework, or if that's something that you might consider.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that You guys are testing the bounds of my knowledge about everything that goes on here, which is, great and fine. In terms of like specific private groups who are doing open data that we may have reached out to, I'm not sure about any specific ones, but it's the sort of thing where the framework was built to be used by anybody who wants to share material and data. It's not, public versus private sector specific or like academic versus citizen science specific. So I think, if there were companies that really wanted to share their data and were looking for a place to share it, we would be, we'd be happy to have them.
Well, Courtney, we're over time. I don't know if you want to add something before we finish, but thank you very much for joining this session. It was great, and the tool is amazing, I think.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great chatting with you all. Thanks for all the great questions. And if you do ever want to, contact us with feedback or you saw anything during the presentation, you're like, it would be great if it did this. Contact@cos.io. We are always happy to hear from people. We love getting feedback.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
See you.